Imagine having to restart whatever you're doing every 60 seconds, doing things a little bit differently each time. That's the creative impetus behind Minit, the 2018 Zelda-like whose largest gameplay gimmick is forcing you to do things both quickly and deliberately. From the moment you pick up a cursed sword on the beach within the earliest seconds of opening the game, the timer starts ticking. When the count finally gets down to 0, you die and are brought back to the last bed you rested at. There's no way to pause the timer, no way to extend how many seconds it gives, or any other ways to cheese it out. It's always 60 seconds long, then you're dead. Each of your 60-second runs will either be completing some sort of task or exploring in order to find new tasks. The more random stuff you do, the more golden items you unlock, which then allows you to explore new areas and get more shortcuts, which opens up different paths on subsequent runs. And in the event you're too slow to accomplish whatever you had set out to do, there's a suicide button which brings you back to your last checkpoint ready to go again. Imagine having to restart whatever you're doing every 60 seconds, doing things a little bit differently each time. It's a restriction that makes it so that even the most mundane tasks have a really high sense of urgency. The first quest you complete in the game is to go kill 5 crabs, which would be a leisurely introductory task without the timer, but with the timer, it's a mad dash to find which screens on the map the crabs are living on, killing all 5 of them, then hurriedly sprinting back to the quest giver to claim your prize, then you're off to see what your newfound item can help you do. The broad strokes of the game are relatively linear. You're going to hit the same most important beats and unlock the same important items in roughly the same order as most other players, mainly due to the fact that a lot of the areas are gated by whether or not you've unlocked certain abilities. But you will have some wiggle room within the game's key areas to do things in varying orders. Imagine having to restart whatever you're doing every 60 seconds, doing things a little bit differently each time. It turns the game into somewhat of a puzzle where you push the limits of where you can go and what you can do with such a small amount of time. It's a puzzle whose complexity grows as the minutes go by. The map stretches outwards in all directions from your central starting location and loops back in on itself in surprising ways as you go further along. You'll partake in some very simple combat against some very simple enemies, you'll push some crates around in some very simple block puzzles, and like I already mentioned, you'll pick up items that allow you to explore more parts of the map. It's not hard to see where this game took its inspiration from. For better or worse, it's a 2D Zelda clone through and through, with a time-based gimmick on top of that. But despite its obvious lineage and the relative simplicity of most of its pieces, you won't really have time to think about those comparisons in the moment. My 3 hours with the game wasn't one big 180-minute adventure, but rather 180 small adventures that added up to be 3 hours. And that's why I think I liked Minit as much as I did. It just goes to show how important pacing and framing are for a game that I reflect upon my time with it so positively, despite the fact that its building blocks are all rather basic. Imagine having to restart whatever you're doing every 60 seconds, doing things a little bit differently each time. That's one of Minit's 2 biggest compelling aspects, the second of which is its style. Minit is quite the game to behold. Its striking 2-tone black and white color palette is probably the first thing you're going to notice about the game, and it is most certainly cool. Couple that with an awesome retro OST and you get a presentation package that is consistently awesome, with maybe the small downside that sometimes areas don't read super well. There's enough diversity in the landmarks here that you're likely not going to get too lost, but in a post-game scavenger hunt I realized just how abstract some of these areas were when a guide told me to go to the swamp, and I had absolutely no idea what it was talking about. It's a small gripe though. Overall, the visual and audio style of this game is rad as heck, but you probably didn't need me to tell you that, did you? Imagine having to restart whatever you're doing every 60 seconds, doing things a little bit differently each time. To be honest, one of my only real gripes with Minit is that it doesn't explore that mechanic as deeply as you'd think. When I first heard the elevator pitch for Minit, I thought it was going to be more of a speedrunning centric game, with you learning more and more about the mechanics and more about the area until you could eventually beat the game in under 60 seconds, with all of your accumulated knowledge. Needless to say, that's not at all what this is. It's just a regular adventure game that is forcibly broken down into 60-second chunks. While not entirely a bad thing, the timer does do its job in making the game feel frantic and action-packed, it doesn't really try to build on that at all over the course of the game. If you've played through one 60-second life in Minit, you've more or less seen the majority of what the game has to offer. Go do quests, go fight enemies, go solve simple puzzles, just do it all in 60-second chunks. Imagine having to restart whatever you're doing every 60 seconds, doing things a little bit differently each time. Even though I don't think it's a mechanic that Minit explored anywhere near to its full potential, it's hard to find fault with a game so charming and short. Its sub 3-hour runtime means that even though the depths of its gimmick aren't all that deep, the game is very deliberately a small pool. It's about the same level of complexity and overall length of what I used to expect out of browser games back in the day. Which is only a partial dig because despite their usual simplicity, browser games were more often than not passion projects with some really cool gameplay ideas that were just fun and interesting enough for you to spend the better part of an afternoon with. And that's exactly what you'll find with Minit.